Welcome back, iguanas, to listen to chapter 6 of The Crooked Sixpence. I'm going to put Francis down on the floor. He's a bear my grandma made for me when I was little. Chapter 6. Daylight disappeared along with the fresh smells of grass and wet mud. Ivy gave a dusty cough and reached forward blindly into the shadows. Soft carpet cushioned her hands, sending waves of heat through her body. Her skin felt ticklish. It was the same sensation as before. "Seb," she cried. "Seb, are you there?" There was no response. She took a couple of deep breaths, but her heart was pounding, her whole body shaking. She smelled old leather and boot polish. She had no idea what that meant. She tried crawling forward. Wherever she was, there had to be a way out. After a few paces, Ivy heard a click, and a silver light materialised far in the distance. Her eyes watered with disbelief as she scuttled towards it. It quickly grew to the size of a letterbox, shedding just enough light for her surroundings to become clear. She gasped as she saw the brown suede lining of the suitcase. Wait, was she inside it? Was she inside the suitcase? She hurried towards the rectangle of light, and when it was big enough, clambered out onto a cold stone surface. Looking back, she saw an identical suitcase to the one she'd picked up in that field. The same fastenings, battered leather and brown paper tag, standing on the floor. She glanced down at her legs and stared. They were tiny, the size of rolling pins, but getting bigger. Her bones creaked and her trousers bubbled as if blisters were forming under her skin. In seconds, everything had returned to its normal size. Trying hard not to panic, she got shakily to her feet and looked around. She was in a huge standy cave, about the same size as her school sports hall. The high ceiling was fitted with two glass discs that oozed butter yellow light out over the floor, which was packed with the widest assortment of luggage Ivy had ever seen. Stacks of suitcases, toppling pillars of hat boxes, piles of handbags and turrets of metal trunks. It was like some sort of cloakroom fortress. She spotted a single opening in the cave wall, which appeared to lead off into a dark tunnel. "Seb," she whispered. She needed to find out where he was. She turned back to the suitcase. The lining seemed to disappear into darkness like some sort of optical illusion. She checked the tag on the handle. Londinor was written on it in black ink. Londinor. Officer Smokeheart had said something about that. The dark-haired boy had called him an underguard. She wondered what it all meant. Just then, the suitcase began to shake. Ivy retreated from it as it rattled across the stone. The dark lining exploded with blonde hair and the grey sweatshirt. "Oh, going to throw up," Seb spluttered as he fell out of the case and onto the floor. His arms, legs and torso rippled back to normal size as if they were made of plasticine. "Seb, are you all right?" Ivy was filled with relief as she stooped to him to help him. His hands felt clammy and cold. "I really need to..." Before he finished his sentence, he was vomiting. Ivy dodged out of its path just in time. An expensive-looking leopard-skin briefcase was in the unfortunate victim. She covered her nose and ushered Seb over to the corner of the cave. "Looks like the travel bag doesn't agree with your friend," a voice remarked, close by. Ivy spun round. The dark-haired boy was standing behind her, dusting down his knees. "He's not my friend," she corrected in a tight voice. "He's my brother. And of course he doesn't enjoy bag travel." She said the phrase like it was a medical term. The boy smirked as he closed his suitcase. His dark hair fell across his angular face. "You two use rugs or vacuums, I suppose. You sound posh enough." "Posh?" Ivy shook her head. "Rugs or what?" Behind her, Seb's retching noises stopped and she heard heavy footsteps staggering over. He swallowed hard, teeth clamped together, pointed a shaking finger at the suitcase. Good question, Ivy said, resting her hands on her hips. Where are we? The boy scratched his head. What do you mean, where are we? Arrival's chamber, Londinor. Londinor. There it was again. Seb took a large gulp. London, huh? He cleared his throat. Does anyone want to explain how we just crawled through a suitcase to get here? The boy narrowed his eyes and assessed Ivy and Seb very carefully, as if taking notes. Then he reached into his leather jacket pocket and pulled out a comb. It was dark brown, made of plastic. What's this? He asked, studying their reactions closely. What is it used for? Seb and Ivy exchanged an uncertain glance before Ivy fumbled for an answer, more out of politeness than anything else. It's a comb, she said slowly. You untangle your hair with it. The boy went very still for a moment, and then he sucked in a huge breath and dragged his hand along his jaw. No, he shook his head. You can't be. You shouldn't have even be. All of a sudden, the tiny voice of a shopping centre tannoy filled the cave. Traffic build-up in a tunnel 34D. Underguards are on site. Ivy searched for where it was coming from and spotted a conch shell hanging from the ceiling, just like the one that Officer Smokeheart had used. Somewhere outside the cave, she heard the crunch of footsteps. The boy looked round. Don't just stand there, he hissed. Hide! Seb threw himself behind a large, sun-bleached portmanteau. Ivy looked around desperately, but before she had time to pick anything, the boy seized her arm and pulled her behind a set of matching tweed trunks. And not a moment too soon. Lumbering through the cave opening came a hulking man in the same black uniform as Officer Smokeheart, an underguard. He had a thick grey moustache and huge wiry brows, beneath which his small black eyes hid like flies. Ivy's heart pounded as she watched him plod into the centre of the cave and sniff. She shot a glance over at the pool of vomit. Seb was hiding a metre away from it, directly opposite her. She could see his scuffed trainers poking out from behind the portmanteau. Wait, I can see him! Ivy jerked forward, but the dark-haired boy hooked her arm around her chest to keep her still. He twisted round, making sure that she could see his face, and gestured for her to be quiet. His eyes looked hollow with fear. Ivy peered back. She couldn't whisper over to Seb. The underguard would certainly hear her. She just had to hope that the man didn't spot him. Ahem! The underguard tapped his polished boot on the floor. Okay, go ahead, he instructed, as if talking into a walkie-talkie. On his command, a short brown feather popped out of the air. It floated in front of him and then tipped upright, zipping to and fro as it wrote a message. The man focused on the words intently, nodding as he read. Ivy thought back to the feather in Grandma Sylvie's house and shivered. She squinted. Notice of arrest. Suspect 1, female, 4 foot 10 inches. Pale green eyes, brown hair, age and name unknown. Last seen wearing dark blue coat and yellow rubber boots. Possibly dangerous. Suspect 2, male, 5 foot 9 inches. Green eyes, blonde hair, age and name unknown. Last seen wearing grey hooded sweatshirt, white trainers and jeans. Possibly dangerous. Suspect 3, Valian K, male, 5 foot 7 inches, dark hair, 15 years old, last seen wearing leather jacket, dark trousers and fingerless gloves. Extreme attitude, problem, extreme attitude problem, known thief. Report all sightings to Officer Smokehart. The underground's eyes widened as he read the last line. The feather twirled, gave a puff and vanished. Ivy's body went rigid. Suspects 1 and 2 were unmistakably her and Seb. The underguards were hunting for them, but she didn't understand why. She thought back to what Smokehart had said on Grandma Sylvie's footstep. Sylvie, Wrench, 12th Night, disappeared. She wished she could discuss it with Seb. His trainers had now disappeared behind the portmanteau. Thank goodness. But now she saw his face reflecting in a pair of shiny briefcase locks. His cheeks were bulging, his lips pinched together. Oh no! Seb threw up onto the floor with the sound like a plug hole being unblocked. The underground jumped as the sound reverberated around the cave. He immediately turned in Seb's direction. "Who's there?" he growled. Ivy tried to dart forward, but the boy's arms prevented her. She felt his other hand clamp over her mouth. "Well, well, well," the underguard stepped forward, grabbing Seb by the top of his hoodie. "What do we have here?" Seb tried to break free as he dragged out from behind the portmanteau. "Get off me!" His face was greenish and sweaty. "What's your problem?" The man shoved him out into the middle of the cave and took a good look at him. Ivy could almost see him checking off the description of suspect 2. His eyes narrowed. "My problem, son, is you." He slid a tiny object out from under his long cloak. Ivy saw a flash of silver between his fingers. "A paperclip?" Seb exclaimed. "What are you going to do with that?" The underguard smiled wickedly and shook the paperclip twice. It unfolded till it was straight and then lengthened. In a streak of silver, it leaped out of the underguard's hand and onto one of Seb's wrists. "Hey!" Seb's hands snapped together, and then the paperclip wrapped itself around them. "What the—" He strained to pry them apart. "You can't do this!" The underguard took him by the shoulder, pushing him towards the cave exit. "You're under arrest. I wouldn't struggle if I were you. Uncommon paperclips don't like to be pulled apart." Ivy got one glimpse of her brother's features before he disappeared into the passageway. His brown eyes darted wildly around. He was looking for her. Well, well, what is going to happen next? Where are they going to take Seb? And how is Ivy going to save him? Maybe we'll find out next time. Bye-bye, iguanas.